Boys and girls, we've learned about winter, how the weather changes in the wintertime, and the days and nights change. We learned about animals and what they do in the wintertime. Now we're going to learn about plants. What plants do in the wintertime? Have you ever wondered about that? Look at those trees in the picture. I don't see any leaves on them. Wonder what it's like to be a plant in the wintertime. We're going to read this article through, and then we're going to go back and look at some of the words that we might not understand to see if we can figure out what they mean. Plants in winter. What happens? Many plants in winter look bare and brown, just like those trees. They have no leaves. That means that they're bare. The plants are in a dormant stage. They will wake up in spring. Plants will grow again. Tree sap. Sap flows inside trees. Sap brings food from a tree's roots to its branches. In the winter, sap stops flowing. It stays in the tree's roots underground. Sap will flow again in warmer weather. I'm wondering about that tree sap, exactly what that is. We'll go back and look at it in a little while. Evergreen trees. Evergreen trees stay green year-round. Their needles are skinny and keep moisture inside longer than leaves. Evergreens drop needles a few at a time. New green needles keep on sprouting. So that must be why those trees stay green all the time. They continue to sprout needles. Winter color. A few plants show off their color in winter. Holly is a green bush with red berries. Stems of dogwood plants are red, yellow, purple, or green in winter. Some evergreens are purple or silvery gray. When winter's over. In the last days of winter, snow still covers the ground, but here and there, new plants poke through the white snow. Crocus or tulips are first to sprout. Their leaves, they show that spring is coming soon. We've learned a lot about plants in the winter. Now let's go back and see if we can find out what some of these words meant that we weren't quite sure of. On this page, it talks about plants being bare and brown. And then it says the plants are in a dormant stage. That word dormant, I wonder what that means. Let's read the next sentence and see if we can figure this out. They will wake up in spring. Plants will grow again. It says they're going to wake up. So I'm thinking this might be a little bit like hibernation, that plants sleep in the winter, because the next sentence tells me they're going to wake up. It looks like they're not going to be growing either, because it says plants will grow again. So I'm thinking that dormant might mean they kind of sleep. They're still alive, but they do not grow. So it's kind of like being asleep and not growing. This next part was about tree sap. We saw that word a lot in here. And it says that sap flows inside trees. So if it flows, it tells me that it must be a liquid. Thinking about how we talk about water flowing. So sap must be a liquid. Let's keep thinking about that. It brings food from a tree's roots to its branches. So, that would make sense that it's something that flows, a liquid that moves inside because it's bringing something to the branches. But in the wintertime, it stops flowing. Then it says sap will flow again in warmer weather. So I'm thinking that sap has to be a liquid that moves through a plant. That kind of makes sense. If it says sap flows, it's maybe if we said the liquid moves inside trees, that sounds like that's what sap is. It's a liquid that flows or moves through a plant that brings the food to it. Then we read about evergreen trees. Yeah, and we learned that their trees stay green all year round. And their needles, I've seen those needles, they're skinny and they keep moisture inside longer than leaves. So let's think about leaves on the tree. What happens to leaves? They dry up. Have you picked one up in the fall when they start drying up and falling? They're not very soft. They're crunchy. So I'm wondering if moisture might mean to keep a little wet. Let's see if that makes sense. Their needles are skinny and keep wet inside longer than leaves. Evergreens drop needles a few at a time, but new green needles keep on sprouting. I know sprouting means to grow because I've heard that word with flowers sprouting. So moisture, I think it does. I think it means to keep wet. Next, we read about winter color, and we did learn that some show off color. Even though most look bare and don't have much color, there are some plants that do, like the holly bush and some of the dogwoods. But then we got to when winter's over. That was interesting because even when winter is still around, some plants are starting to grow. It says right here they poke through the white snow. And then we had those words tulip and crocus. And it says they're the first to sprout their leaves. Now, if I didn't know what a crocus was or tulips, when I see that they're going to sprout their leaves and they poke through the snow, it says new plants. Those must be a type of plant. And you know what? It's so neat because when we see those, we know that spring is coming soon. So I hope you learned a lot today about plants in the winter. We learned that some plants are dormant, which means pretty much that they sleep. They don't grow, but they're going to grow again in the spring. We learned that tree sap, that there's sap that flows inside trees and it brings the food from the tree's roots to the branches, but in the wintertime it doesn't flow. So that might be a reason that trees don't grow in the winter because they're not getting their food. And we learned that there are some trees that do stay green in the wintertime. They don't have leaves, they have needles. And they can grow because the needles stay moist. They're wet. And that they keep on growing throughout the winter. And yes, we did learn that some plants do have color in the winter. And that when winter is almost over, a couple of plants begin to grow again. We look forward to seeing spring, don't we, after a cold winter.